Diabetes Connections is brought to you by inhaled insulin, glucose management in the moment, by Omnipod 5, the only tubeless pump that integrates with Dexcom G6, and by Dexcom G7, powerful, simple diabetes management.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, let's talk about menopause and type 1. It's hard enough to find information about this part of life for women without diabetes. So when this week's guest started looking for research about T1D, she wasn't too surprised to come up short.
I found blog posts by two English women who live with type 1 diabetes, who had been recording their menopause journeys, their perimenopause journeys, and they were facing exactly the same issues with a lack of awareness, a lack of supportive information, a lack of resources as I was facing.
Dawnie Adams is determined to use peer support to push medical research forward. We talk about her experience, what she and her group are doing to support each other, how diabetes and menopause can have similar symptoms, which just makes everything more confusing, and much more. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And let's be honest, a bunch of people have already tuned out, or they never tuned in. As soon as they heard menopause, they were like, nope. But that is part of the problem, right? I mean, we just have to start talking about this more. I find it really frustrating that there isn't a lot of research for women without diabetes. So I can only imagine what it's like with diabetes. You know, all I can do is try to have an engaging conversation about this. So I asked Dawnie Adams to come on the show. She is wonderful. We have followed each other on social for a long time, but I met her when I went to Ireland in May for the Thrive-A-Betes conference. She took me and a group up to Northern Ireland for sightseeing in her Mini Cooper, and we do talk about that, so I thought I would mention it here and give you some context. But Dawnie is part of a group on Twitter called Menopause Mithers, and I will link that up and other resources over at diabetes-connections.com. She's a midwife working on her PhD. She was diagnosed with type 1 as a young adult, and at the time, she was told no more than 2 children. She actually has 4, and that she would be lucky to see her 45th birthday because of diabetes. It's unreal to me that that was very common thinking at the time. But it does explain, you know, why the research on aging in type 1 is really just getting started. All right, my conversation with Dawnie is coming up. When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Well, unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety, risk information, and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Dawnie, welcome to Diabetes Connections. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to talk to you again after our adventure in Ireland and in Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure I've completely recovered. Thank you for everything. Thanks for the hospitality.
Oh, it was great crack, and you're very, very welcome. I had a ball that weekend.
So much fun. I wanted to have you on the podcast because this is a topic I've thought about for a long time, but haven't found anybody really to talk to, which I think is kind of typical when we're talking about menopause, not even with type 1 diabetes, but menopause in general. But let me just start by asking you, obviously with your career and your profession and working with women, it seems kind of natural that you would be a go-to for information about menopause. But why did you start talking about it? Tell me a little bit about what prompted you to really become more public about this kind of thing.
I really became more interested whenever I started to notice changes to my own menstrual intervals, time between periods, how my glucose levels were changing, how periods were starting to space out. And whenever I asked my consultant, who I adore, about menopause, she looked at me and said, well, this is your bread and butter. You do this every day in work. You know more about menopause than I will ever know. You're trained in this. You tell me. And I said, but I wouldn't be asking you if I knew the answers to these questions. So she pointed me in the direction of an information leaflet published in the UK. And I went home. I excitedly looked at this information leaflet on diabetes and menopause. And the only thing that made this particular information leaflet stand out from everything else about menopause, which isn't really a huge amount of literature, to be honest, for people experiencing it, was test your blood glucose levels more regularly or more frequently. And at that point in time, I was already using the Freestyle Libre. I was scanning every 2 to 3 hours. I had 100% scanning profiles on my Libre. And I thought, well, that doesn't really tell me very much. If that told me things, I wouldn't have gone and asked those questions. So the internet being the factor that it is, I went and started to Google type 1 diabetes, menopause, and I found blog posts by 2 English women who live with type 1 diabetes, who had been recording their menopause journeys, their perimenopause journeys. And they were facing exactly the same issues, with a lack of awareness, a lack of supportive information, a lack of resources, as I was facing. Their own accounts, again, were very personal. I think anything to do with reproductive health is very personal anyway. But it was interesting saying that they were writing from a point in time where they hadn't access to any glucose sensing technologies. They didn't seem to have consultants or healthcare professionals who were able to shed any more light on the subject than I did. And they didn't seem to have any kind of a support network. So that was really what started me trying to dig a bit deeper, trying to find more information, and trying to find a community of other women who I could learn from and share with, and have that collective hive mind wisdom that so often comes with type 1 diabetes itself.
We should pause for just a moment and mention that you have how many sons? It's all boys in your family, right?
Yeah, I have 4 sons. So again, conversations about periods, conversations around pregnancy, while there were abstract concepts for each of my sons, so it wasn't something that any of us were able to learn from each other or support each other with. So yeah, 4 boys, 4 now, much larger than I will ever be.
Yeah, I have one of those. All right, but then you found more and more women who could anecdotally share information, who could share medical information. Are you still, is this a group that you're still talking to today?
Absolutely. There's a friend I live in the north of Ireland, and there's a friend from the Republic of Ireland who was going through very similar struggles in terms of the glucose management as I was. And we met through Twitter, of all places, and we were talking in the background about our own experiences. And as we were sharing the struggles that we were having with rapid swings in glucose levels and rapid dips in glucose levels, and the frustration of trying to achieve those flat lines that so many people with type 1 diabetes work so hard to achieve. We were going, we're just not even hitting close to what these guys are achieving. So between the 2 of us and another girl who, again, I found on Twitter, we started up a support group for women online. So we actually started a Twitter support group, and the Twitter support group then became a WhatsApp support group where we were able to share our stories offline, because it was much safer in a closed WhatsApp group to be able to express a lot of those frustrations, a lot of those concerns, without people who maybe didn't understand the nuance for type 1 diabetes in a way that no one was coming away feeling criticised or feeling ostracised or feeling that their experiences were being minimalised. And I think it's very similar with women with type 1 diabetes going through pregnancy. Yes, other members of the population, the global population, experience pregnancy, but it's in a very different way from women with type 1 diabetes experience in pregnancy. So again, I think menopause Also, we experience it, but in a different way because we have other targets to achieve in terms of HbA1c, in terms of time and range, in terms of glycemic indexes, in terms of insulin use, in terms of managing glucose levels during exercise. So there's an additional burden that comes with living with type 1 diabetes and going through normal life events.
It's interesting to listen as someone who does not live with diabetes, but is going through menopause. I'm more than happy to be open about that. I have probably been in perimenopause for several years, and we're getting close now. I have never felt, I don't want to say less control of my body, but almost more surprised, on a weekly basis between hot flashes, between unexplained weight gain, mood swings, sleep problems.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about all of those very common symptoms of perimenopause and menopause, then layered with type 1 diabetes? If it's not too personal, like what changed for you or for these other women with type 1 diabetes and menopause?
I think the most common themes which have arisen from peer support Zoom meetings, peer support discussions, casual chats in a coffee shop have been the hot flushes or flashes in particular, because whenever you have type 1 diabetes, usually one of your low blood glucose warning signs is becoming very sweaty, confused, distanced from everybody around you. It's almost as if you're trying to struggle to make yourself understood or make yourself heard. So the cognitive changes and the physical changes that go with a hypo and hot flushes, very, very similar. And for those of us living with type 1, we're always told, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what your blood sugar is saying on your sensor, treat the hypo, but test once you've treated the hypo and then check again. So what I had found and what my peer group had found was we were treating hypos that actually weren't hypos at all. When you're sitting around with a blood glucose of 7 or 8 in UK and Ireland measures, can't quite remember what those are in terms of US measures, but we'd have taken some apple juice, we'd have taken sweets, we would have had something which should raise our blood glucose levels, and 15 minutes later finding out your blood glucose levels were in the low teens, which is not a good place to be. Above 200. I know that that's above 200 in US numbers.
And as we talk here, right, any number she says for the US, you have to multiply it by, I want to say 17. I'll fact check that. But right, if she's saying low teens, she means high blood sugar.
So yeah, that was something that every one of us had experienced. And those sweats where other people didn't notice you sweating. So loved ones weren't aware of the fact that you were actually sweating, but you were just dripping with sweat and the confusion that went with it as well. And again, whenever you've had diabetes for any length of time, regardless of the type, but particularly type 1, if you've experienced repeatedly low blood glucose levels, there's evidence out there to suggest that it does impact your cognitive function, that it impacts your long-term memory, which is, I think, why we're now being encouraged to avoid hypos, to try and reduce the number of hypos that we have to less than 5% of our day, like less than 5% of a 90-day period of time, to keep that memory function working. But whenever you're in menopause, cognitive function is also impaired. So it's trying to tease out what was diabetes, what was menopause, but the two things are so tightly wrapped around each other that it was very, very difficult actually getting hard evidence to say, yeah, this is not diabetes, this is perimenopause, this is a symptom of perimenopause. And that was where a lot of the conversations initially started. And as I say, where a lot of us are using the wearable glucose sensors, but those devices, as excellent as they are, as life-saving as they can be, aren't always as accurate as manufacturers would like us to believe. Sometimes it's the position that we've put it on in, where we're wearing it on our body. If we've calibrated it appropriately, if it's at the start of its use, if it's at the end of its use, there are so many things which can impact it. That's another challenge with using those sensors. It's also a challenge whenever you're testing finger prick glucose. making sure that your hands were clean, that you haven't used an alcohol gel or an alcohol hand wash, trying to make sure that you actually get a significant volume of blood. Because while you might be absolutely delighted with the fact that you've got a 0.03 ml sample to put onto a stick, if it's not actually blood sample, but if it's a plasma glucose sample, it's going to read differently from a full capillary glucose sample. So I think that has also been a big part of that challenge. I say the symptoms of menopause, symptoms of hypos, so often fall into exactly the same category. And that's well and good if you have stuff for testing your blood glucose levels. It's a wee bit more challenging whenever you don't. And we all have days whenever we fall between the cracks.
Has there been research or anecdotal research on hormone replacement therapy and type 1? And I know that can be controversial without diabetes, but I'm curious what you all talk about. Quick biology fact. Did you know that your lungs have the surface area of a tennis court? That's interesting, but why is it important? Well, since Afrezza is a powder you inhale, the insulin is delivered through the large surface area of the lungs, which allows for ultra-rapid absorption. The insulin passes through your lungs into your blood in less than 1 minute. Your blood sugar may start to lower in about 12 minutes. That's glucose management in the moment. Find out more, see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium. It is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, if you've ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on Afrezza.com/safety. Now back to our conversation, and Dawnie's answering my question about hormone replacement therapy.
Well, there wasn't anything significant. There still isn't anything significant, but the WhatsApp group and the Twitter group that I had referenced earlier, we came together, and when we were talking about things that we had seen, a number of us started HRT in and around the same time, following on from discussions that were happening across the British media by celebrities here in the UK and across Ireland, and their challenges with menopause itself. Because of my research work that I've been doing, I've made contacts who are incredibly talented whenever it comes to data analysis, number crunching. And one of the researchers that I've worked alongside on a number of other projects had asked me if I had any data sets that I would like analysed for publication and presentation potentially at a Sensors and Sensor Applications conference. So previously we'd had a paper published using some of my own glucose data sets and data from other wearable devices, which was accepted as a journal article, which is great whenever you're trying to get up your Google Scholar scores and you're trying to get up your H-index as an early career researcher. So I had approached the girls in the WhatsApp group and asked if anyone would be willing to share data sets, explained why we were going to do this, and ultimately that they would have the final say on any edits of the research paper if we were able to get one pulled together, if there was any statistically significant outcomes. So a number of the girls did submit data sets from different sources. A number of us in the group use Android APS artificial pancreas system. Some of the girls in the group are using commercial hybrid closed loop systems, which are funded in different parts of the UK, across Ireland, not here in Northern Ireland itself, but that's just the way it is. And we sent those off to my research friend, and he said to him, is there a correlation or is there anything showing up in data sets amongst women who weren't using HRT? Is there a change whenever they did start to use HRT of any sort? So the data sets that we gave him were 6 to 12 weeks before starting hormone replacement therapy and 6 to 12 weeks after starting hormone replacement therapy. He went off with the data that we'd given him, and he came back and said, it looks like your thoughts around this were fairly accurate.
Mm.
He said there's a clear benefit in terms of glycemic variability whenever you introduce HRT amongst this population. So that opened up an opportunity to have the paper published in a scientific journal after double-blind peer review. I then presented the findings of the research work that we had done at the European Conference on Sensors and Analysis in November online. And it opened up further conversations within the WhatsApp group. And as a result of the paper, a number of the girls decided to go and ask their GPs, their family doctors, about trying HRT. I think it's like everything in this life. There will be things that you can be very, very strongly against, and the evidence for anything is always grey. It's never black and white.
Sure, yeah.
Very few things are black and white, hard facts. And it was very much on the line of, well, if it works and if you find that it's changing things, improving things for you, that's brilliant. If it's not changing things and it's not improving things for you personally, don't stick with it. There's no point in beating yourself up because something that's working for this person isn't working for this person. So it's been interesting seeing how that has unfolded within the peer support group. There are about 40 of us now in the peer support group. And I think there are about 30 of us who are using HRT, various types of HRT. But some of the girls, following on from the work that we had produced collectively, had those conversations and got prescriptions for HRT and did find that for them, it was improving glycemic variability, it was reducing their HbA1c, it had improved the cognitive issues that they were facing. It certainly seemed to impact the frequency of hot flushes, and it certainly seemed to impact their self-confidence. I think that's one of the things we never talk about when it comes to menopause. It's as if you've been unplugged from everything around you and your energy levels just deplete, but with that your confidence levels deplete as well. And certainly speaking to other friends who've gone through menopause who don't have any type of diabetes, they speak very much about feeling very useless, about not feeling connected to people around them, feeling as if they have nothing more to contribute in terms of their career progression. They've nothing to offer friends, family, colleagues, because they don't have the confidence to actually put their hand up and say, oh, I can do that. And reading round wider menopause publications, Jen Gunter wrote a brilliant book, The Menopause Manifesto. She talks about that, but she also talks about the fact that when you come through this transitional period, the confidence returns and you have a wisdom that you didn't have whenever you were in your teens, in your 20s, in your 30s, or in your 40s. I'm now living to actually get to the stage where I feel that I have that level of wisdom, that I've lived long enough and I've experienced enough to be able to say, I know what this might be. I might be able to help you with this. I don't think to be an expert in anything, but at least to have that wisdom because of the path that you've walked is such an important thing. And I love the fact that she put that into the book and that she talks about that empowerment that comes with living beyond your reproductive years and being able to support others at various stages, being able to support granddaughters who are going through puberty, being able to support colleagues, being able to support other family members going through pregnancy, and as time progresses, being able to support others who are going through menopause, perimenopause. I think there's so much to be said for that. I love the fact that we're going to be around long enough to be able to do that.
Let me jump in and ask about that. I love it too. And one of the things that I get frustrated with, but I understand, is that, and you've already mentioned it, there just isn't research around menopause and type 1. And part of that is this horrible idea that was true a very long time ago, which was that most people with type 1 would not live long enough to go through menopause, to get through menopause and enjoy that older age as you just talked about. When you were diagnosed, you were diagnosed as a young adult. Did they say anything about this time of life? Was it thought about? It's something, I mean, I almost hate to ask in such a negative way, but you know what I'm getting at.
I totally do. I was diagnosed in April 1993. I was in my final term at Stranmillis College, which is a College of Queen's University in Belfast, doing a teaching degree. And I remember distinctly a conversation with the consultant, who was such a lady. She was so lovely. And she said that she talked a lot about pregnancy and how pregnancy was very complicated. And whenever I said, oh, what happens when we get older then? Because a friend from school was diagnosed the same day as me, and she and I were both at the same stage in university life, same stage in relationships. And she said, oh, well, we don't really know what happens. If you see your 40th birthday, we can have that conversation then.
Oof.
And I remember thinking, if I see my 40th birthday, we can have that conversation then. Okay, that hit really hard. And it wasn't helped by the fact that about 6 months after I was diagnosed, a girl who had been the year above me at school, who'd had type 1 diabetes from her early teenage years, had died from diabetes complications. Here in the UK, where insulin's free, where access to pens, pumps, glucometers was always free of charge, thanks to our NHS. And whenever I had my second son, a family friend of my husband's family, their daughter passed away very sadly as a result of complications of type 1 diabetes before she reached her 40th birthday. So it was two females that I knew of, and I watched every time I was nudging closer to 40, I was hearing more about people across Northern Ireland who weren't hitting that point in their life. They weren't hitting that 40th birthday milestone. They weren't hitting that celebration of moving into the next phase of your life. And I remember whenever I did get to my 40th birthday, complication free, 4 children in the house, a new career on the horizon, thinking, how have I lived this long? Why did I make it this far? Why am I different? And who can I go to now for the next stage of life? Because when I tried to have the conversations with my healthcare professional team, there were no answers coming back from them. And I started to think that I was the outlier, not realising that I wasn't an outlier, that I was actually in a group of women who had done incredibly well, were incredibly fortunate to get to that stage. But the wider healthcare belief was that we wouldn't reach that stage in our life. And the lack of research, the lack of information, the lack of awareness about what then happened to us if we didn't have a surgical menopause as a child family planning method or as a treatment for other conditions which can go with type 1 diabetes. There was nothing. There was just a gap on so many fronts. And I feel so tragically sad for so many of my peers who did go through surgical menopause. They did have hysterectomies. They did have oophorectomies. They had salpingectomies. So they either had their womb, their ovaries, or their fallopian tubes removed as a means of family planning to ensure that they didn't have another pregnancy. And they were left completely high and dry in terms of support. They had nobody that they could go to because you don't really talk about hysterectomies in this part of the world. I don't know what it's like in the States, but certainly in this part of the world, you just don't discuss.
We don't talk about anything. We don't talk about hysterectomies. We don't talk about periods. We don't talk about menopause. There's going to be people who see the topic of this episode and say, oh my gosh. And they'll never hear it, unfortunately, because men and women, we just kind of, we've really just got to keep, I don't know. I think we just got to keep talking about it till people listen. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dawnie. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Not at all. But I think it's been really, that's where the peer support thing has been so valuable for all of us.
Yeah.
Because none of us know at any stage what lies ahead, what's going to happen after your next encounter with a GP because of abnormal bleeding patterns. You don't know what's going to happen if you're having abnormal emotions, if you're having abnormal for you circumstances in your life. So I think it is so important to find a network of folk that you can link in with. That collective wisdom, as I said earlier, the hive mind that goes with the lived experience. It's not evidence-based, it is anecdotal, but so much of it rings so very true at the end of the day, and that's where the power of those conversations lies.
I think too, it gives you strength to go to your doctor and say, this worked for this person. Here are the methods. Here are the words. Yeah, I mean, even when my son was much younger and we were kind of, learning diabetes, we have a wonderful endocrinologist. And one of the best things about him was he would listen when I would come in and say, listen, I know this, I saw this on Facebook. I know we have to be careful about social media, but I know this person, I trust this person, and they tried this method. And I'll give you a specific example. We did this untethered method, right, where he used an insulin pump along with a shot of long acting. We did that for 2 years because puberty, which
Yes.
kind of like menopause, you never know what's diabetes and what's puberty, but he had these massive insulin needs. And I learned that from somebody else. And our doctor was great enough to say, okay, we'll give it a try. I think too, having those peers gives you the words, gives you the ideas to bring to your physician who can help you through it. And if you have a physician who says no or dismisses you out of hand without any reasoning, it's so demoralizing and difficult. But you've got to find, I don't know how easy it is there. It's never easy here to find a new physician, but you can do it. And I don't know, I'd encourage everybody to keep pushing.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the conversations we had recently in the WhatsApp group was how whenever you go in now to speak to a GP nurse or an endocrinologist, you know that while you're there on your own, physically there on your own, the rest of that peer support group is right there in the room with you.
Yeah.
And the conversations that those women have had and that they've shared with us have helped to open up conversations with GPs, GP nurses. You're saying as well about changing healthcare providers. Our GPs are surgeries. So there's maybe 5 or 6 GPs within a GP practice. Some are larger than that, some are smaller than that. But even I know now that I would contact 2 GPs in particular out of the 6 in my local GP practice to have those conversations with, because I know that they have more empathy, that they're more willing to listen than some of the other GPs would be. By the same token, I would go to some of those other GPs if I had other issues, because I know that that's where their area of expertise or where their empathy in particular lies. So it's something, again, that with the healthcare system that we have here, there is a wee bit of flexibility built into it.
If people want to learn more, can you share the Twitter group? I know it's not the same as the WhatsApp group, but where would you send people for more information?
So on Twitter, the group is called Menopause Mither. So it's menopause and mother with an I instead of an O. The reason being, the person who came up with the Twitter handle for the group, the part of England that they live in, they would say mither rather than mother.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, keeping to our roots.
You mentioned when you were diagnosed, in your early 20s, that they kept saying, we'll talk about that later if you make it to 40, it's just horrible. When you look back at your own diagnosis time, what do you wish that you had known at that age? Was there anything that might have helped you at this point in time? Or was it just, you kind of got to learn when you hit perimenopause and menopause and the information's there now? I'm curious, like for our younger listeners or for women who, who are in their early 20s or even younger, is there anything you'd like them to know?
I think that having an awareness or a knowledge that you were not the only person at that stage in your life, and that there were older women who are willing to share the information that they've gleaned from their own life experiences, were out there and were easily accessible, would have been so very helpful. And I know that I said that I was diagnosed at the same time, exactly the same time as a friend from school. But having access to a peer network of all ages, at all stages in life, with a vast array of lived experience, could have made some of my journey less challenging and could have made it feel that I really wasn't the only person who was struggling to live better with the poor resources that we have. Because even with the insulin pumps, even with the glucose sensors, they still don't make up for the lack of a functioning normal pancreas. And because so much of what we do is very much placed under the lens of a microscope, quite literally, whenever you're getting blood samples done, when you're having urine tests, whenever you're having your lipids checked, knowing that other people have those same emotions, go through those same challenges on a regular basis, and that they're there as your expert panel of lived experience would have been something that I feel I should have tapped into much earlier on in my diabetes journey. But there wasn't an internet whenever I was diagnosed. We were still working with BBC Basic computers here in the UK. Apple Macs had literally just been released the year before I finished my primary school teaching. So I think being able to be directed towards other women, those wider global support networks as well, would have been such a benefit.
Well, it is a benefit you are providing, along with the other members of your group and those who are speaking out. And I cannot thank you enough for working through all of this and sharing so much and being so open. Dawnie, thank you so much for joining me. I hope we talk again soon. I know I'm going to see you in at ADA pretty soon, so we can reconnect. I don't know if we'll have quite the adventure we had in Ireland. No Mini Cooper this time, unless you're planning to rent one here. I'd be careful.
Are you not going to bring one for me to drive?
We'll see what we can do. But seriously, thanks again. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for opening up this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'll link up more information about menopause and type 1, the links to Dawnie's information, menopause mythers, and everything we talked about over at diabetes-connections.com. Up next, something new. I'm going to talk about wins and fails. Diabetes doesn't always have to interrupt your day. Dexcom G7, a continuous glucose monitoring system, sends your glucose numbers to your phone or receiver. Know where you are and where you're headed without finger sticks and without interruptions. Dexcom G7 is the most accurate CGM, and it's covered by Medicare. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Time for wins and fails. I'm trying something new this week. And yes, I have copied this from one of my favorite podcasts. It's called Pivot. It's about all things tech and business, and I highly recommend it. It has nothing to do with diabetes, but I do like this segment that they do. So wins and fails here is just going to be stuff that I noticed or experienced. Not really hard news stories that I would put in our In the News episodes. So this week's win is Chris Wilson's fully closed loop. Chris is a longtime friend of the podcast. I think I've been connected with him for much longer than I've been doing the show. He's been a guest several times. We usually talk about advances in technology. And he's been posting recently, these are public, you can find these, I believe, on Twitter. He's been posting about his experimentation with a fully closed loop using Android APS. He says it's a new algorithm, and he derived the underlying dosing math for it. He says the algorithm only has 2 settings. A fully closed loop here means no manual interaction with the system, no corrections from the user, no meal boluses or meal announcements from the user. You just put it on and let it run. Chris posted his final stats for the week. His average glucose was 125. He was 98% time in range, the target range 70 to 180, standard deviation of 24. Again, no bolusing, no meal announcements, no corrections. I want to be very clear, this is not a commercial system. This is not an available system, but I think it's just worth noting here because he's not the only one doing things like this. And just like the commercial systems were pushed many years ago into sharing data, into better hybrid closed loops by the DIY community, and I firmly believe we would be very far away from what we have right now if it wasn't for the DIY and we are not waiting community. The next step in these AID systems is coming from what these folks are doing here. And the next step, as I see it, is fully closed loop. I was talking to industry folks at ADA. They are all working on this. They know that this has to come next, that carb counting and announcing meals even is not cutting it. So it's great to see somebody really succeeding in this. Congrats, Chris. And thanks for sharing. My fail for the week is a couple of weeks old. It's from ADA, the American Diabetes Association Scientific Sessions Conference that I went to at the end of June. And this is really just a complaint, but it is a fail. I've been eating gluten-free for 2 years now. I don't have celiac. I have a sensitivity. It really affects me. So I'm really happy to eat gluten-free. It's been fabulous. And it's always hard when you travel. But gluten-free options were few and far between. And I'm talking in the conference hall, in the press room, which I'm very glad they have snacks and drinks in the press room. Thank you very much. But zero gluten-free options. So I did drink a lot of coffee there. I appreciate that. But a lot of the private parties I was lucky enough to attend, they didn't have the best food options either. And we were in San Diego. I know it can be expensive, but a little bit, maybe even prepackaged, a little bit of forethought. I did hear some complaints at ADA, and I saw this firsthand when I treated my friend Scott Johnson to a soft drink, that the food and beverage prices at ADA were out of control. It was like going to the most expensive stadium that you can imagine. I got a water and a Diet Pepsi, and it was $10. So come on, ADA. Scott Johnson, I'm calling you out here. If you've listened this far, people, you probably know Scott Johnson, and he is well known for drinking Diet Coke. He was very concerned he had to go off-brand. There was no Diet Coke at ADA, only Diet Pepsi. I did learn a lot at ADA, and I have some interviews still to come from there, so those will be airing in the weeks to come. Thank you so much to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
Hey, I need your help. It would be great if you could help me spread the word about Diabetes Connections Presents Mom's Night Out. This is a new overnight conference for moms of kids with diabetes. And I know a lot of you who listen are not parents. Some of you are. But those who are not, if you could share this event, I'm sure you have a lot of people in your social circle who are moms of kids with diabetes or who know families touched by type 1. Just head on over to diabetes-connections.com, and right on the top is all the information. We're in 3 cities. October, we're going to be in Frisco, which is outside of Dallas. Then we'll be in Providence, Rhode Island. And in February, we'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina, with more cities to come next year. There's a mailing list you can get on so you don't miss any of the information. But registration is open for those 3 events right now. Thanks for helping me spread the word about Mom's Night Out, a place to learn and laugh and just feel like you belong, right? Spend some time away with people who get it.